immediately. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third session that we are having for VIVAAD. First of all, introduction. My name is Shuv. I'm here and I'll be taking a session on THW motions and THW debates overall. We'll just go ahead and talk about very brief basics of what THW debates are all about, what you're supposed to expected to do in THW debates, how to go ahead and engage with the same, and at the same time, how to go ahead and talk about all of these things, let us say, in terms of how do you overall cover the scope of the motion in the debate and at the same time have like a good time in the debate. So few things before we go ahead and talk about this, and I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of this from the previous sessions that you've had. Every motion type was designed in the thought process that we want to go ahead and target a specific type of discussion. I think TSW motions also try to target a very specific type of discussion that can be enabled through the motion type. It is, to a degree, a sort of policy based actor analysis discussion. So, most of the times, TSW motions will require you to create a policy. Most of the times in TSW analysis debates, you are likely thinking from points of views of organizations, probably institutions, and a lot of the times it's going to be state based organizations. So it can be state, or like let us say some sort of a central government, some sort of a governmental structure, things like that. This is likely what you get out of a THW setup. It can either be on an organizational scale, or it can be a state based infrastructure, something that you will require to go ahead and engage with. So, the key components that THW debates try to target would be democratic setups, like think like of a policy on a democratic scale, what sort of policy building can happen, etc. A very basic idea of the same, or try to think of what happens when organizations want to make particular decisions or want to enact out particular decisions. And that is where the discussion about actor analysis comes into play. For those of you who might or might not be aware, actor analysis inherently requires us to think from the point of view of who is the enabler in the debate and who has the agency in the debate to take a particular specific action. And if they do take a particular specific action, like if they do go ahead and opt into that action, what is the tangible benefit that they are able to derive from it? That is what actor analysis is all about. Who has the capacity to make a decision and take an action, and who has the capacity to go ahead and be swayed or be persuaded, or would probably have some sort of a thought process, a logical reasoning to opt into some sort of a decision or not. This is what actor analysis essentially talks about. Now, when you do actor analysis in a policy motion, you are effectively looking for actors that have the capacity to go ahead and engage with a decision that can be implemented. So, we are looking for implementable solutions. We are just not looking for actors who can implement a solution. We are taking another step and talking about an implementable solution. And this is what TSW debates are clearly able to point out in the construct. If you look at a TSW motion, you are likely going to go ahead and understand that the motion is trying to solve a problem. It is likely that the motion has been phrased in a very specific manner. The specificity of the phrasing is there because the phrasing wants to act like a solution response, and you are expected to do the legwork and the mechanism and the back thought process to point out and figure out what the actual problem is and why the given mechanism likely solves the actual problem, and how do you go ahead and create a system that takes you from point A, which is the problem statement, to the actual point B, which is the solution statement, which is the motion. Like, for example, this house would ban drugs. Very basic THW example. I think everybody has used it everywhere. Some perspective on how you go ahead and look at this debate. The first thing that you try to dissect here is why are we banning drugs in the first place? Now, for a motion like this, it is very clear. It is pretty simple, easy, because I think most of what societal norms also talk about is that drugs are not necessarily good. They can probably cause bigger problems for human beings, etc., they should not be actively available to people. That's the reason why a lot of states probably do not allow you to go ahead and engage with the same. All of these things are there. So you're probably aware of the fact that drugs are a problem. So you subconsciously don't really think on the fact that this THW debate already indicates or hints towards a problem. And the solution is already given. They're talking about the solution. They're saying that they would ban drugs. That's already said. So there's nothing that can change that. Proposition is talking about why they would ban drugs. Simple. So the solution is already given. You have to fill the linkage on why this needs to happen because you're trying to prove that there exists a problem in the first place. While OP will try to prove that the problem was never there in the first place, or will try to prove that there's a better solution having accepted that the problem exists. So there are two things here, two logical chains very clearly. OP will either try to prove that the problem never existed, that there is no necessity for us to ban drugs, or OP will try to prove that accessing and acknowledging the fact that we need to ban drugs, let us think of what a better way for it could be. And then OP would go ahead and create a counter policy. Now, this is what you understand as a counter policy. Prop can create a policy, a mechanism that shows us how to ban drugs. Now, maybe Prop did not do a good enough job. Maybe Prop can do a good enough job. But opposition still wants to run a policy, still wants to tell us about another way to solve the same problem. Opposition has total liberty to do that. That is the most important construct, a counter prop. You can go ahead and create a counter prop or create a counter policy. And the counter policy will go ahead and try to accrue the same impacts or the same advantages that proposition tries to engage with. You'll try to solve the same problem. This particular debate will go ahead and give you the liberty to choose between both of them. So nobody can say, oh, as opposition, and especially judges, don't allow judges to tell you that as opposition, you're just supposed to defend the status quo. And also at the same time, don't allow judges to tell you that as opposition, if you don't give me a counter prop, your debate is probably not that great. Don't allow judges to tell you either of these things because it is in complete liberty of the opposition side to go ahead and provide a counter policy or to decide to go ahead and just fulfill what they think is the current benefit on status quo itself. That is, to try and point out why there are no problems with the status quo and inherently the status quo setup is good enough to go with. Like, for example, simply saying, there are no problems with drugs. We necessarily don't want to go ahead and ban them in the first place. So now I think by now you're clear about two constructs. A, what are the basic burden requirements for a THW debate? And B, what is a counter prop and how to utilize the same? So on basic burdens, Gov absolutely has to give a policy. THWs will not go ahead and accept a non-policy case that is detrimental to proposition. You have to go ahead and provide a policy to be very effective as government teams in these debates. Try to think of how to solve the problem to reach the solution statement. You have identified the problem statement. You've explained why the problem exists. So you're not going under the assumption that, okay, there's a problem, because then OP can come ahead and say that the problem does not exist. It's just an assumption. So I'll try to disprove the fact that the problem exists, and that can be problematic for you as well. So you try to first go ahead and solve the assumption that there is actually a problem and this is the reason for it. The next step you do is explain that having established that this is a problem and having established the fact that the motion already gives us a line of thought, let us go ahead and talk about the implementation of this line of thought. How do we practically implement the same? So that is where the policy comes in. Now, before we delve deeper into the policy, you are clear on the burden analysis now on both fronts. First, on what the prop burden analysis is, and second, on the op burden analysis, that is simply to go ahead and say either that there is no problem to begin with and the status quo is fine, or there is a problem and we both accept that there's a problem Only the fact is, I as op can maybe solve it better than you as prop could. And here is my unique counter policy. Few things to note before we move on. First of all, counter policies need to be exclusive. They cannot try to co-opt structures, or they cannot be too similar to propositions policy that was originally played out. So your exclusive impact only exists if your policy is also exclusive to begin with in the first place. And that is a very important clarity that you need to maintain at all points in time in your own head. Number one. Number two, policies at any point in time must come from the first speeches itself, largely, especially policies that require any sort of clarifications on framing, any sort of challenges on definitions, etc. If you require all of those things, all of those constructs, you will have to go ahead and bring them from first speech itself. That is the most charitable way of debating as well. And that is also the most standard and accepted segment of how to deal with this. Utilize certain amount of debate strategies and a bit of common sense as well on this. If you think that in a THW motion, the object that is being talked about or the decision point that is being talked about is not necessarily as atrocious as drugs, then you do not necessarily need to go ahead and create a counter policy. It is, of course, up to you if you wish to, but if the severity of concern is not very high, you can also run a status quo debate on why the problem does not exist. And this particular question will only be answered in a strategic manner in your prep time when you sit with your team and try to discuss what do you think? Do we need to accept or concede to the fact that this is a problem? Or can we actually justify this not being a problem in the first place? If you think you can logically justify this not being a problem in the first place and actually stand a chance in the room, then go for it. Defend status quo. Otherwise, you know the alternative. This clarifies what the setup should look like for THW debates. Most importantly, now on fiat. Fiat is a very specific term, largely applies to THW debates. Fiat says that government teams have the liberty to decide what policy they want to run and are automatically given the assumption that this policy would run. So you cannot question whether government teams' policies are effective or not, whether they will run or not. You can question whether they are going to be able to solve the problem or not. So it cannot be that, oh, Gov talks about this policy, this can probably never happen. This will probably never happen. This will probably never pass the parliament. That is not the question of whether it will effectively pass the parliament, whether it will effectively be implemented, etc. You have to assume that it will. And then you will have to prove why, even if it will be implemented, it might not have any sort of impacts, or it might not be able to generate the value that it expects it to generate in the first place. Two other ways to go about it is to explain why an actor will or will not have an incentive towards opting into this policy. Now, you can go ahead and prove it in two ways. One, you can try to prove why the actor would have an incentive to just maintain status quo. Or on the flip side, you can try to prove why an actor would try to just go ahead and not opt into this policy and probably opt into the other policy, alternative policy that you have. And if you're able to prove easy likelihood of opt in, that counts as well. If you're able to prove that you are getting the same, if not better, impacts out of substantially lesser resources being utilized on your side of the paradigm, that is also good. If you're able to prove that on your side of the paradigm there is better and more number of impacts of benefits being provided to stakeholders, that is also valid. So weigh up any sort of comparative weigh up that happens in a debate like this needs to be established in terms of clear pragmatic benefits that can come from this debate. By pragmatics, I simply mean the capacity for you to prove that some individual, institution, or system will get some sort of benefit in real time through this policy, be it in the short term or be it in the long term. Some cool strategies here as well from proposition. If you can try to prove why the problem is imminent and persistent enough to require an immediate solution, which is something that we call as an urgency metric in a debate, you have a greater likelihood of actually having your policy stick and at the same time give you the sort of tangible impacts that you wish for the policy to give. So, this is a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, we are talking about the strategies that we can implement during cases. Let us also talk about how do you build a policy. So, there are some layers to a policy. You first identify the agents that have the capacity to solve the problem, the best possible, best capable agents. Then you explain the best possible structures that these agents can utilize to go ahead and solve the problem. And then, after identifying both of these things, the agents that have the capacity to solve the problem and the structures that the agents are likely to utilize, or the structures that are the best possible measures that the agent can utilize, has the liberty to utilize, that can go ahead and solve the problem. Once you identify both of this, you merge the two together, and that becomes the third segment of your policy, where you clarify and point out the exact pathway of implementation. How does the agent implement the actions that the agent can likely make and hence derive the output? For example, you cannot say something like, oh, a company is going to go ahead and ban drugs. Companies cannot go ahead and ban drugs. Mostly that does not happen. So you have to go ahead and assume that the best agent in this particular regard would be a government. It has to be a government. If it is a government, then you now start talking about what a government can do. There are types of bans in this regard. So you can decide on a stance. It can be a hard stance, it can be a soft stance, it can be any manner of the way that governments can go ahead and implement a specific ban. And once you're able to figure out a specific policy structure that can be utilized, you simply have to explain how this ban would be implemented. The implementation would bring certain segments like number one, communication channels, wherein this is informed to stakeholders that something like this has happened or will happen. Secondly, capacity for these stakeholders to raise questions and concerns and hence create a feedback loop that makes the system better. Try to input this if possible in any policy that you're making. Third, punitive measures, basically explaining what happens if a policy gets breached and if people don't follow the policy. And fourthly, the tangible impact that it will have on a positive scale on people. These are the four things that you have to keep in mind when you're trying to explain a policy. Now, policy debates are more technical of the debate motion types and hence have so many things that you have to keep in mind. Things like, for example, you go ahead and talk about A, whether there's a problem or not, B, if there is a problem, who is the best actor to solve it, C, if there is an actor identified, what is the best approach to solve it, D, how do you implement the approach, E, what are the benefits of the approach, and F, what are the reasons why the stakeholders would also prefer an approach like this. This is the entire complete circle of burdens that are largely present within a THW setup. Fulfilling all of these or most of these burdens should give you a very clear margin victory. But also, the point in this particular motion type is largely to try to simulate a sort of environment for you to try and understand how state based structures work and what are the structural efficient factors or inefficient factors currently in play within status quo and how to make them better at any point in time. This is going to be an important thing for you to go ahead and engage with. And this is going to be an important thing for you to go ahead and keep in mind when you're actually engaging with the debate on a back and forth through the AP teams that you have or through the AP debate that you're going to have. So, in an APD, it is very important for you to actually structurally plant your policy in a strong manner, because if you don't, then you're likely to have enough chances being given to opposition to refute and break down the same. So when you're trying to cover loopholes, try to point out the obvious policies that can exist. Try to play the devil's advocate in your own head and bring out certain key structures that, if compromised, could take down your policy to begin with in the first place. But also keep in mind that the implicit understanding of a THW debate relies on two things. One, whether there is an actor best suited for the motion. If yes, then what is their incentive to engage with it? And number two, if there is a stakeholder better suited for this motion, or if there are a degree of stakeholders involved, then what are the benefits and to what degree are they affected by the decisions of this particular actor to begin with in this particular regard? This is the overall construct of a policy debate. And all of these questions don't need to be engaged in the first speech itself. Let us now think of a little bit on how to structure these things. So it is very feasible and good if you're able to bring the actor analysis and the policy in the first speech. The second speech can talk about the tangible argumentative impacts and benefits of the particular policy. The first speech should also ideally at least bring one argumentative impact. The third speech can then tie back all of these impacts, compare the two policies or the proposition policy and opposition status quo, and then at the same time explain why both of these things are probably having certain misconceptions or certain issues, concede to the misconceptions on proposition side, and still explain why there are benefits on proposition side that op cannot go ahead and get. This is called way up. So you explain why, even though there might be some issues with your case, you still have a greater likelihood of getting a win. Be charitable. Don't have to go ahead and point out why your case is totally flawless. That is not the point. The point is, can your case have some flaws but still have enough benefits and impacts to go ahead and outbest what you can get as tangible benefits from the opposition side of the paradigm? This is more important for you to go ahead and engage with at any or all points in time. So these are the basic constructs of what the structure of your speeches should look like. From the other side of the paradigm, on a similar way, from opposition, try by pointing out why there exists or does not exist a problem to begin with. Try by explaining why, if there is no problem, then how is status quo beneficial for both the actors, why it is important to maintain status quo, and for stakeholders to be a part of status quo and hence exist the way that they are. And then go ahead and point out why the propositions policy might have some policies and how you are able to better preserve the benefits on your side rather than on proposition side. You can do all the silly things over the due course of your speech. If you're doing a counter policy, then it works simply very closely to what the proposition also has to do. You have to explain the counter policy, etc. in the first speech. You have to go ahead and explain the ideological differences that you establish. You have to explain the unique factors on your side, the unique assumptions and underlying identifications that you have done, and then you have to explain why your policy is probably better than proposition's policy at getting the impacts that you're talking about. Sometimes they can be new benefits, sometimes they can be the same benefits that proposition are talking about. Both of them are allowed and both of them are fine for you to engage with at any point in time. Now, the last thing that we will do in wrapping this discussion up is to talk about a very tiny construct. And that is that not all policy debates are going to be based upon a government. Sometimes policies will be based upon other non-state actors. Now, there can be non-state actors. Mostly policy debates are institutional based, almost no policy debate will be directly individual based because individuals are less likely to run policies or any sort of models. So most policy debates are going to be either state or non-state institutions. Now, in non-state institutions, you have to try to understand how these non-state institutions think. Now, non-state institutions can be anything. They can be an organization, a corporation, a sports federation, a football team. They can even be a social movement. As long as when we refer institution, we don't mean objectively an institution. We also mean that certain constructs of an institutional setup is safeguarded in the structure of the actor. Now, in this particular regard, there are two things. There can be a single actor, or there can be more than one actor in this particular regard. If there is more than one actor, you can do, if you think there is more than one actor, you can do two layers of analysis. You can talk about a primary actor analysis, actors you think are more proximate. You can do secondary and tertiary layers of actor analysis as well. Same goes for stakeholders. It can even make it easy for you to engage with a debate like this because you might be able to point out few things and few clarificative constructs. Like, for example, talking about why giving benefits to the primary actor is likely more important than the tertiary actor, or going ahead and talking about why the primary actor, which is the main agent of any particular decision being made, is likely to be swayed by the policy that you have or by the sort of structure that you're following. Or you can also try to prove why the main stakeholder being benefited is more important than tertiary stakeholders getting the benefits of it. Classic examples of this would be if it's a THW debate on education systems, where there can be more than one actor on governments, on educational boards, on government and private educational institutions, on parents, teachers, etc. So that's an entire ecosystem. So whenever we are talking about systems, each ecosystem can be divided into multiple layers of actor analysis. So try to keep these constructs in mind as well. But most importantly, policy debates are one of the most fun debating motion types that I have personally discovered. And I think it's really amazing if you're able to utilize the maximum of your imagination in debates like these. So it's very intuitive of a case that you can run in policy debates like this. Try your best to have fun during policy debates because of the fact that it allows you so much scope to use your imagination. So don't be worried that, oh, I have to do this. It's not a checklist that you absolutely have to follow. At the end of the day, you're debating for fun. And the most important thing that you absolutely have to do is make sure that the fun does not get lost from the process simply because you had burdens to fulfill in a debate. So, at all points in time, keep learning, have fun, and make sure that you're having a great time learning loads about debating structures, but don't necessarily get overwhelmed by the fact that, oh, now I know so much that THW debates can or cannot do, and my objective requirement should be to do each and everything. That is not how you're supposed to run a debate. Try to nitpick and point out certain very specific things that you think are valuable and important. Insights matter more in debates than bulk content ever could. And strategizing your cases will win you more rounds than brute forcing content through your speeches ever would. With that, thank you so much for joining in. My fellow uh, my fellow friends here would take Q&A session for you, and then they are going to arrange some other activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shafia.